Today we have a crazy story of revenge on some friends who destroyed a relationship. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, engagement over. I set my dad up and ended his engagement. My parents got married when they were quite young. My dad was 25 and my mom was 24. They got married and shortly after, my dad joined the Marine Corps. He was deployed to a conflict zone and had to leave for a while. At this time, my mom was already pregnant with me. Even after I was born, my dad didn't return home. For the first 2 years of my life, my dad didn't get to see or touch me. He only saw pictures of me that my mom sent to him occasionally. Months after my second birthday, my dad finally returned home. My mom and aunt, who lived with us to help care for me, were happy to see and welcome him back. Naturally, since he'd just been back from a mission, he was supposed to get ample time to spend with his family. But in less than 2 weeks, my dad lied about having to get back on the field. He left again. At this time, my aunt got suspicious. She didn't think my dad would have to leave after such a short period, especially since he'd been away for more than 2 years. She also pointed out to my mom that my dad didn't in any way look like someone who had been in an uncomfortable situation. After another year, my mom and aunt figured out what had happened. My dad returned from the field after 6 months, but he lied to my mother, traveled to a different state, and stayed there for more than a year. His reason? Well, your guess is as good as mine. He went to be with another woman. Apparently, while my dad was away, he started to exchange letters and occasional telephone calls with a woman he met through his colleague. She was his colleague's sister. He fell in love with her and assured her that he would leave his long-term girlfriend, my mother, for her. And listen, my parents were married at the time. My dad knew my mom was carrying his child, but he lied to this woman because he knew that if she found out that the said long-term girlfriend was carrying his baby and was his wife, she wouldn't want to be with him. Wonder how my mom and aunt found out? Well, my aunt was dating a private investigator at the time, and when she mentioned to him that she was worried about my mother, he promised to look into it. When my dad left my mom and lied about having to get back in the system, he went back to that woman. My mom got the telephone number of the other woman, called her, and introduced herself properly. She was shocked and apologized to my mom. She ended her relationship with my dad, but my dad still didn't come home. Maybe he was mad at my mother or ashamed, but he refused to speak to her. After months of refusing to talk to my mother, my aunt managed to convince my mom to seek a divorce. My dad was upset that she wanted to leave him, never mind that they weren't even living together or speaking to each other. He cried, promised to change, and he even moved back home. He then resigned from the Marines for no good reason. My dad is a good-looking man. Women hit on him all the time. Sometimes he would go to the grocery store with my mom, and they would come back in a heated argument about him flirting back with another woman. She also caught him on the phone with different women on different occasions, but she would always forgive him. All this while, my dad wasn't working or even trying to get a job. My mom provided for us financially, and since her job was very demanding, the time was never right to have a second child. I'm still his only child to this day. Fast forward to when I was 14, my mom took me to the mall for new clothing. We spent close to 4 hours at the mall because my mom did some shopping of her own, and then we returned home to see that my dad had left. He left a note telling her that he was leaving her. My mom sighed, went into the bedroom, and took a long nap. My mom said that she was relieved that she didn't have to take care of my dad anymore, but I was mad at him for leaving. I believed and still believe that he cheated my mom out of the best years of her life. To make matters worse, he started dating an older lady with grown-up kids in the neighborhood. My mom insisted that she was fine and that all she felt was relief that he was gone, but she also started to drink a lot. In 5 months, I watched my mom become addicted to alcohol. She always had a glass of alcohol in her hand. I thought trying to make my dad come home would make her better, so I began to visit my dad frequently at his girlfriend's home. I realized one day that his girlfriend didn't even know that my dad wasn't properly divorced from my mom, so I told her. I wanted her to be so mad that she would leave my dad, and my dad, having nowhere to live, would come back to my mom. Well, that didn't work out. It only made the situation worse. My dad and his girlfriend got into a fight over his deceit, and to prove to her that he wasn't delaying getting a divorce because he still loved my mom, he made his girlfriend pay a lawyer to prepare the divorce papers. My mom handled the divorce the same way she handled my dad leaving. She took long naps and drank like a fish. My mom was starting to experience blackouts, and her addiction was affecting the quality of her work, so my aunt, the one who helped raise me, came to stay with us for a while. My mom worked in a financial institution, was good at what she did, and had made a decent amount of money. When her drinking problem got worse, her sister resigned so she would not get fired from work. She then started to suggest therapy or rehab, but my mom refused. While all that was going on, my dad had left the older woman he was with and was dating a rich woman. It was either my dad was genuinely in love with her, or he just wanted to be with her because of the money and connections. I suspect the latter was the case. My dad started to put his life together to be with her. He went back to college and dressed better. My dad was a very handsome man, but he had a little chip in his front tooth, and he fixed that too. He didn't get a job though. I've never been able to figure out what my dad has against working to earn a living. Anyway, what I believe was my dad's prayers got answered, and his girlfriend let him move in with her. His girlfriend was really kind to me. She treated me nicely whenever I visited. She gave me a room in her home with video games, and she let me bring my friends whenever I wanted. She was just really chill, and it amused me how she kept my dad on his toes. She was the kind of woman who just wouldn't tolerate any form of disrespect, and my dad knew that. I was enjoying the royal treatment I was getting until one evening, my dad told me he was going to ask his girlfriend to marry him at dinner. I rolled my eyes and thought, no way she'd agree to that. My dad was still in college, had no job, barely any work experience. All he bragged about was working in the Marines and being at a battle zone. His girlfriend, on the other hand, was a very rich woman, and she had rich family members. Her uncle was mayor of our town. Her grandmother was very wealthy, and she and her siblings and cousins inherited a lot of money from her. I just didn't think she would agree to marry my dad. I didn't even think he had a ring. Surprisingly, she agreed to marry him when he knelt to propose that evening and asked her to marry him, holding a beautiful ring in his hand. First of all, I didn't understand how my dad could afford to buy a ring like that. I pretended to be happy for them, but I was mad. I didn't believe that my dad could be so nice and gentlemanly to another woman, but he was mean and lazy with my mother. All through their marriage, my mom begged him to get a job, but he refused. She begged him to go back to college, but he also refused. He refused to do anything in the house and did nothing nice for her. Now, he was with this woman cooking her dinner and going out of his way for her. When my mom decided that going to rehab was the best option for her, my dad decided I would move in with him and his girlfriend. From the first day I moved in with my dad, I began to scheme how to get my dad and his fiancée to end their engagement. First of all, I wanted to get revenge on my dad. Secondly, I didn't think a good woman like his fiancée deserved someone like him. I was still scheming and thinking of what to do when I returned from school one afternoon and saw my dad in the kitchen with a mischievous smile on his face. Just as I turned to leave for my bedroom, I saw a woman tiptoeing back upstairs. I didn't see her face, but from her unusual hair, I could tell that she was someone I'd seen before. I just didn't know who. My dad was cheating on his fiancée, and it was with someone she knew. On that day, my stepmother was away on a work trip, so I figured if I told her when she returned, she might not believe me. A few hours later, I looked down from my window and saw my dad escorting his fiancée's nail tech to her car. The woman he was cheating with was the same woman who came over often to fix her nails. I wasn't disappointed in my dad. I knew he was going to mess it up, and all that sanctimonious behavior was just to sway his fiancée. The next day, I called his fiancée's office and her secretary picked up the call. I knew the secretary enough to see that she did not like my father at all, so I told her about what my dad did. She didn't sound shocked at all. I could tell she had done her homework and knew the kind of person my dad was. Anyway, she said we could not just tell my dad's fiancée, we had to arrange for her to walk into the situation. On her next trip, my dad had gotten even more comfortable. The nail tech woman packed a small bag and spent the night. The secretary also moved things around and scheduled an important meeting for the next day. My dad's fiancée was not the kind of woman who would reschedule an important meeting, so she flew back in that night. And since it was really late, she took a taxi back home and didn't call my dad to pick her up from the airport. I saw her coming in and wanted to prevent her from ringing the doorbell and alerting the lovebirds upstairs, so I tiptoed down and opened the door for her. She asked why I was still awake and hurried up to their bedroom. I heard her scream from the room, but I did nothing. I just waited for the secretary to come around. She had mentioned that she was going to come over to prevent her boss from doing something bad. Well, her boss didn't do anything apart from the first scream. She threw the nail tech and my dad out of her house. My dad knelt and tried to ask for forgiveness, but she ignored him. She made the secretary watch them pack and leave while she went into her home office. My dad and the nail tech left that night, but I didn't leave until the next day. She made me wait until my aunt came to pick me up. My mom came back from rehab as a better person. She's been sober for 12 years now, started her own business, and got married 6 years ago. My dad cut me off, so I don't know what's up with him. Yeah, I hate to talk bad about people, but people like OP's dad are kind of like one of the worst examples of parents. People who go around, have these kids, and then move on, just continuing to try to live their own life as if their kids and their family never existed, and lying the whole time through. I guess at the very least, the one consolation you can have is they didn't lay their hands on anybody, they just kept sleeping with them and lying about it. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, I rejected and humiliated the most popular girl in high school the same way she did to me. I turned down the most popular girl back in high school, and she sought to get back at me. Little did she know that I'd been patiently waiting for my perfect opportunity to present itself, and little did it occur to her that she wasn't the first person to have it out for the other. I, male, 20, was one of those goth kids back when I was in high school, and although it was only some months ago when I was still in high school, my payback act is still as fresh as ever in my memory, as it was well worth every single bit of non-existent effort that I'd put into exacting it. My story very well began way back, even before my high school journey, and my meeting of the one person whom I'd been friends with since I was still in middle school. This person was none other than Janet, female 19, the most popular girl in high school, and apparently in the eyes of everyone else in the school, also the most beautiful. Now, things weren't always as they were during our fallout, as for as long as I can remember, Janet and myself had always been the closest and best of friends, as we quite literally grew up together in the same neighborhood and we even attended the same middle school back then. Not only that, but our houses were also on the same block, which made our seeing each other daily a natural occurrence. Now, as for when we both first came into contact with each other, it was kind of an unforgettable experience, as it was almost cliché. One fateful day, while my parents were on their way back from the farmer's market, I waited gleefully outside of our home, eagerly anticipating their arrival, when I saw her parents' car roll into their driveway just a few houses away from mine. Regardless of the distance, I could readily tell that our eyes had locked onto each other, and this instance of ours was maintained just a little bit. However, it was just enough, until she went into her home. And then right there, before I could even gather my thoughts and myself, I was pushed and ganged up on by several boys in the neighborhood who were infamous for bullying younger kids. They apparently saw me looking at the new kid on the block, and apparently they'd already laid claim on her, so they saw my presence there as disturbing, and hence the commencement of several bullying acts. And so while they were in the middle of all that, Janet came right back outside and stopped them, as she had already caught sight of what was going on right from her home. It felt really weird, the whole situation that happened that day, being rescued by someone I would later come to become the best of friends with, and also later along the line, develop certain intimate feelings for. However, there was nothing I could have done but accept her help. And I don't know why, but then for some reason, they dared not even bother me again, as I was always seen from Janet from that day onwards. Now, this was the start of our friendship, as I introduced my family to Janet and she did hers to me. Now, all through middle school, we were quite literally inseparable. One would even think we were family, if it didn't already occur to them that we were in a relationship together, that is. Now, when I got to high school, this was when things got really interesting. I never would have thought that high school would change someone so much. In fact, I never would have believed it if it hadn't already happened to me. I noticed the clear changes in her attitude and behavior when she and her family went on a vacation to France to spend the holidays. I think this was our first year in high school. I was just getting acclimated to the new school, new environment, and new people I would be encountering on a daily basis for the next few years I would be spending in high school. There weren't really any gothic communities that were present back when I was in my first year of high school. Ergo, the main reason why I didn't have many people I could relate with or associate with, for that matter. Janet was the only one that I would, or rather could, have engaging conversations with, basically to keep my somewhat manageable social life active. However, when she came back from the family trip, she was completely different, in more ways than one. Now, firstly, she arrives back at home and didn't even think to at least leave me a text or even drop by, which was totally fine by me. I took no offense in that, to be very honest. However, when I found out that she had gotten back, we were already in school, and I saw her with some other friends of hers. Now here's where the problem started. I also didn't have a problem with her hanging out with other friends, but but I thought that at the very least, she would have at least told me she had arrived or something. And even when I saw her along the hallway, I even tried walking up to her and basically just try to have a conversation with her. But that was when she did something that I would never have ever thought that she could do. She looked me dead in the eye and asked me who I was. I was slumped. I still stood there trying to explain to her who I was and how we both knew each other in full detail, but she was apparently not remembering anything at that point. That was the moment I knew that I'd become nothing more than a distant memory. I never really understood how that was possible. Someone that I've known since we were both young. At least we both knew each other for the better part of the last 3 years, and that should have at the very least counted for something. I guess I thought wrong. When I realized what kind of situation I'd placed myself in, I simply just ceased all verbal communications and went on my way. I have never felt that way before. That was the first time I would feel humiliation. A whole year went by, and there was no single form of communication between the both of us. And I was my same old depressed, sad, and lonely self. I mean, everyone in the entire school already knew who I was, but not in the same light as they knew Janet. She was quite literally in the school's limelight in the last 3 parties that were organized by the school. She was the leader of the cheerleading squad. Every single guy I came across was either fawning and obsessing over her, or they had one particular thing to say about her. Either way, she was always the talk of the school, positively or negatively, all day, every day. Our paths would later cross a few weeks towards the end of our exams that session, as after a certain football match held on the school premises, an after-party was organized by the members of the school team to basically celebrate their victory. And every student was invited, only if you were able to make it. Now, I had every reason not to go, as I'd always been avoiding social interactions and all, but then I just decided that it was time I had a change of scenery, routine, and atmosphere, and so I decided to go. And as you would have obviously guessed, she, Janet, was there alongside her new set of friends and quite literally every other guy I knew of that were fawning and craving for the slightest bit of attention from her. Now, during this party, I'd already made up my mind not to go beyond my limits of social interaction, and I was determined to stand by my word. Not until I got rounded up alongside some other guys to play a group game of Truth or Dare. It was supposed to be R-rated, but then after several complaints from some girls that were involved, the game had to be moderately adjusted. The game started and went on for quite a while without it getting to my turn, and I was truly grateful until I actually looked up to see the person I would be matching with should it get to my turn, and that was when I saw Janet right there in front of me. I started off by panicking before calming down and realizing the situation I was in and coming to the conclusion that I could actually use this opportunity to my advantage, should things play out the way I want them to. I thought of the perfect instance to dare her. However, I couldn't even realize what I was planning as someone else took that opportunity from me, and just when I thought things were over, she was dared to ask out, sincerely or jokingly, one guy from the group of guys that were seated for the game. She looked around and didn't find anyone worthy of that honor and asked if she could just forfeit the dare. However, she was forced to pick at least one person, as those were the rules, and the punishment for non-compliance to the rules were too severe for her to even consider, and so she went with me, when she apparently had no other choice. And this really got on my nerves, but I knew exactly how to play this. As she walked up to me and prepared to say something, I simply silenced her and made it very clear to her that never in a million years would I ever want to be placed in that relationship situation with her, and she shouldn't ever dream of it. My words echoed throughout that entire room and silence fell. Everyone was stunned, and so was Janet, as immediately after the silence, a huge burst of laughter erupted, and Janet was at her center of it all. I could tell that she felt so humiliated and angry at that moment, but she decided to quell her anger at the time. However, I knew that immediately after the after party, she was definitely going to confront me on what had just happened, and surely enough, she did. It wasn't even less than an hour after the conclusion of the games that she approached me and started voicing her opinions, before dropping insults and then finally threats. I still don't know how, but then she didn't realize that it was me, the same person who was her best friend for the longest time before and during the time she got into high school. After her rants, I simply painted the entire scenario as it appeared to me, to her, and she was left in shock. She basically pretended as though she didn't know I was the one and asked why I didn't even bother to talk to her since she got back. And then I brought back the incident of when she publicly humiliated me the week after she got back from France. She also pretended to not remember that too, to which I made my stance with her very clear. We were not friends, not anymore anyways. We were nothing to each other, and I was definitely not someone that she could have conversations like this with anymore. She was really left in shock as she actually did not expect for things to play out the way they did. Basically, her entire perfect life had taken a terrible turn from that day onwards, as she was no longer getting as much attention as she used to, mainly because of the rejection that she had gotten from me back then. She later came to despise me, but I really couldn't have cared less anymore, as she was no more as important to me as she used to be. It almost sounds to me like instead of her life having this so-called terrible turn from that day onwards, they were probably the kind of person that once they reached high school and they kind of grew into their own and were this person that so many people fawned over, they probably got very used to the experience of nobody turning them down, almost never hearing no. OP turning them down so bluntly, especially in front of all those people, is this like ultimate you can't have this thing and there's nothing you can do. I bet that's why she started pleading with OP and saying, I don't remember all this stuff, except me. Our next story is, my friends decided to destroy my relationship. I returned the favor a few years later. Almost immediately after my group of friends and I were done with high school, we all decided to go on a group trip. One where they all played a nasty and supposedly harmless prank on me, which I just couldn't let slide. I had to get back at them, no matter how long it took me. I wasn't going to relent, and my resolve was also not going to waver. Not in the slightest bit. I, male 26, have always been a socially awkward person. I had little to no friends growing up. The only people that even managed to keep me company during the times I needed it the most were none other than my family and just a few people I was acquainted with back in school. Now, considering the fact that I was excessively introverted, I guess you could say that it was to be expected that I had no friends. However, what I lacked in my social life, I made up for it greatly in the virtual world. Simply put, I was effectively introverted while I was making various attempts at being social, but on the other hand, I was as talkative as ever whenever I hopped on any game to play. And the most common game back when I was still in high school was Call of Duty. I would always trash talk, and one would never have been able to discern my in-game personality from my real-life person. One very day when I'd gotten back from school and hopped on the game, as was my usual daily routine, I got various texts from my in-game friends requesting a meetup as they apparently didn't know who I was, and the only thing they knew about me was the fact that I attended the same school as they did. They just wanted everyone to hang out with each other, and seeing as I was the only one they all didn't know, the curiosity was intense. I thought long and hard as to whether or not I really wanted to proceed to that level of social interaction with my in-game friends, and I came to the conclusion that there was no harm in trying. Little did I know what I was signing myself up for. Now, the very next day in school, when I'd already agreed on a meetup location with the boys, I got there and all eyes were on me. I was initially questioned basically as to my reason for being there, and when I answered appropriately, they immediately welcomed me warmly and for handshakes. I just knew I was in the right place when I heard several other familiar voices. We caught up at length as there was much to talk about, quite literally. It was really fun getting to know these people, and also seeing them in real life for the very first time. Although I had crossed paths with some of them, they recognized me whether it was in the hallways or in class or at the cafeteria. The same could not be said for me, as I was practically making myself non-existent, and the after effects of this would be my complete and total lack of concern and attention to my surroundings and the people in it. Now, right after our group meetup, I noticed that I was beginning to develop more social skills and even engage in longer and more in-depth conversations with my group of friends, and basically with everyone in general. This really helped me a lot more than I could have realized at the time. Now, as at this time, my usual daily routine was basically wake up, head to school, hang out with friends, wait for end of school, head back home, hop on the game and hang out with some friends more, before finally going to bed and repeating the entire process all over again. There was basically no flexibility in my daily life, and I couldn't have cared less. This was, however, until apparently I got to find out that there was someone that was secretly crushing on me. Now, this is very interesting because I never could have even thought about the possibility of myself being the target of someone's feelings. It all came to light one day, right after classes. I was heading to the cafeteria to meet up with my friends when I checked my locker and saw a pink note with a little red ribbon. I didn't really pay much attention to it at the time and simply ignored it. However, the next day I saw the same letter again in my locker, and that was when I realized that I actually overlooked whatever that was, and the moment I opened it, I was just simply at a loss of words. The note basically contained a summarized confession from someone unexpected. Her name was Joanne. She wasn't really as popular as the other girls, but I could picture a face almost immediately after I saw the name on the letter. I could remember vaguely seeing her almost every day after school, and also while I was on my way home. She just so happened to be living in the same estate as I was at the time, and I'd never even for once noticed. After I saw that letter, I could only have imagined the courage she must have had to muster up in order for her to confess her feelings, and most importantly, how long she must have been harboring these feelings. She left a number on the letter and I immediately called the number, thinking it was too late and I must have missed my opportunity. She picked up and we talked for a little bit before I finally asked her to meet up with me right after school, to which she readily agreed. We met up as planned and we had a lengthy conversation on our way home. She was really nothing like I ever could have imagined. No matter what, I just couldn't picture myself with her. She seemed too good to be true. After several other meetings and conversations across the phone spanning over a few months, we both came to the conclusion that it would be better if we both got into a relationship. And that was exactly what we did. And I must say, that was one of the best decisions I've ever made till date. We complemented each other in every way. She liked the things that I liked and vice versa. We were perfect for each other. However, following my commitment to a relationship with Joanne, I inadvertently began drifting away from the boys, as I couldn't be with them as frequently as I used to. We didn't game as much anymore, as I would only hop on the game whenever Joanne was present, and we never really saw much of each other when I was in school, as I was always hanging out with Joanne. I didn't really notice that the guys weren't happy with me, as life was good with Joanne. Then, that was when the boys apparently decided to concoct a plan to come between the both of us, and this plan took effect right as we were done with our final exams. Officially graduating from high school and all, they practically forced me to go on a guy's weekend trip with them under the guise of never really having time for the boys anymore and all. Joanne was going along with this, as she felt like I needed to spend more time with my friends and all, so she didn't really have a bother with that. Now, on this weekend trip, the boys planned out every single activity, from gaming to several outings and also partying. I wasn't really a fan of partying, but it wasn't like I had the choice in the matter. This was probably going to be the last time that every single one of us was going to be seeing each other in such a setting, so I decided to make the most out of the present, and we had the best of times, until it wasn't so fun anymore. Apparently, when it got the time for the partying, I had one too many drinks and I was completely wasted. This was their perfect opportunity. They had some ladies do away with me while they recorded from inconspicuous angles, making it seem legit, and the week after I returned home, they sent the pictures to Joanne anonymously. This caused a ruckus between the both of us. She was really unhappy with what she had seen and kept asking for reassurance and for the truth, to which I could give no explanation for, simply because I don't remember any of the sorts happening. It started off as a small argument and eventually resulted in our breaking up. It really devastated me. I couldn't think or act properly for quite some time. I had a lot of time to reflect and think hard as to who could have possibly sent that picture to Joanne and how the entire situation played out. And the only thing, or rather the only people that came to mind, were my friends. I approached each and every one of them a few weeks later and asked them one by one about the happenings of the party night, and this was where I found inconsistencies. They were all telling the truth up until the part where I was drunk. That was when I knew that they were all in this together, and this really broke every single ounce of respect, trust, and brotherly love I had for every single one of them. I was lost for quite some time. However, sooner rather than later, I came to the conclusion that I was going to get back at each and every single one of them, no matter how long it took me and no matter the consequences. Now fast forward about a few years after high school and approximately 2 years after college, and my resolve was still as strong as ever. Although out of our friendship group of 11 guys, myself inclusive, only 5 of us were still in contact with each other, as we lived in close proximity from one another. We all had different things keeping us busy on a daily basis, and this actually hindered us from seeing each other as frequently as we wanted. But regardless, we still kept in touch. Now, my revenge started when I got wind of 2 out of the 5 guys getting married all at different times, and the other 2 having really serious partners. I was the only one left out without a romantic partner. I couldn't let this injustice slide, and so I took action almost immediately. I'm proud of what I did, and I stand by it. As for the first 2 gentlemen, seeing as their weddings were only weeks apart, I had to act quickly. And I must say, wooing their partners was no easy feat, but it was possible. And I was able to lay with both of their wives on the night before their weddings. The two of them. And obviously I had the evidence to prove it. As for the other two guys, I took my time in making sure that their significant other fell deeply for me. And when my guy friends found out about their relationship with me, it really caused serious problems between both myself and them, and also their partners and themselves. And while the other two guys were trying to reprimand me for destroying their relationships, I broke the sad news to them too, and let everything else unfold from there onwards. It was pure chaos, but it was worth the long wait. The other guys escaped their fate only because we lost contact with one another. However, I still have their revenge planned out, as they must all pay. We were no longer friends, but I could have cared less, as I was better off alone before any of them even came along. OP has to be like extremely loaded, right? Like they have to have a lot of money. Like I'm just trying to think both short-term and long-term how OP would manage to get away with getting with all four of these guys' partners. The only thing that comes to my mind is OP has to have a lot of money, right? I mean, what else could it be? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.